Hey, it's news from heaven. How important is your thinking to you? Do you use it relatively often? Wouldn't you want to know if there's what components influence the nature of the process? That's what we're looking at today. How spirits influence our thinking. And there's going to be three sub-plot points to this. We've got the community auras, and how do they play a role? Then, the aura war. And finally, the influence of spirits and demons. Any of these, except the first one, could be like Avenger movie titles. The first one would be really lame. Avengers, community auras. But the other two, right? This sounds pretty serious. How can we go from this kind of dire, possibly paranoia-inducing stuff to get something that's going to actually help people rise above their fears and worries? Because what we're doing on this show is all the time, everybody, this is you in the middle, you're being taken out by concerns and worries and regrets, all this stuff that doesn't need to be there, because there's a higher truth out there, which is that everything is fine, and something about the structure of what's going on behind things like thinking should alleviate these concerns. And aren't we kind of ready for that? Because I don't know about you, but thinking is not that fun. There's a lot of local religious show host says, turn off your thinking. That thinking is often very hard to control, and why are negative thoughts and negative narratives about myself or about other people just pouring in, and I can't figure out what to do with it? Can we clean up our understanding of the sourcing of that, and does that make it so that suddenly stuff that used to stress us out doesn't stress us out anymore? Let's take a look. Like and subscribe. That's what helps this show keep going. Click the bell if you subscribe, or you may never actually see our shows. We're continuing our series on auras this time, because we're going right to the next paragraph about auras, but this just happens to be auras are part of the how of spirits influencing our thinking. This is Secrets of Heaven, Volume 2. Download the link in the description. Starting at number 1510, we begin in our quest to figure out the mind, just like we said this show was about. Every spirit, and to a greater extent, every community of spirits, has its own aura. And we're talking right away now about the lamest of the movies, the community auras. So not just, and I apologize for the mid-sentence stop, but you might think, especially if you watched our previous shows, that if you've got a little spirit there, oh yeah, that spirit has an aura. So there's an emanation of the characteristics deep within what that person thinks about and what they care about, how they approach life, that radiates out, right? That's not too hard to believe. Swedenborg is asserting that actually there's that individual person, but they're living in a community with other spirits, because afterlife is composed much like here, where we have societies and communities, because it's all people who want to, get along and be in society. But all of those people together, their miniature auras, their lives, who they are, that combines to then have its own signature aura that can radiate out, formed and given off by the assumptions and self-deceptions it has adopted. So what's an aura? Is it some kind of weird magic? No, it's your mind projected outward, and looks like we're starting here a little negative, because assumptions sounds like you don't actually know, and self-deceptions certainly means that actually this community we're talking about here is maybe not so light-filled. It's emanating something that is not the truth. And we get even more intense here, because we're suddenly talking about demons. Demons have an aura formed by their longings, and this highlights the technical nature of a spirit and a demon, because you have a spirit, which Swedenborg says, in this case, we would be talking about primarily negative, or as he sometimes calls them, evil spirits. Their aura has to do with assumptions and self-deceptions, so they're very I've already made a mess of this thing. They're very mind-oriented. But a demon, what's a demon? According to Swedenborg, a demon is a person who is run by corrupt cravings, like the desire to harm people. So this is feelings. And actually, spirits give off an aura that, that's too positive. Spirits give off an aura that is dealing with or caused by the lies they believe, the principles they have hooked onto. And we have all the miniature versions of this in our mind. So when we are gravitated to or completely sure of something that's false or spreading that idea. That's radiating this aura. But what is demonic is this aura that's based on their longings to do harm. And let's see how each of these kinds of auras can affect us. By its inherent nature, when one person's aura of assumptions and self-deceptions influences another person, it makes truth appear to be false. Now, this is basically the headline of this show. Because right in here, we have the assertion that the aura of one person can influence another. So you have this person in the middle radiating out what they believe and think about life. We're talking particularly about spirits in the spiritual world, but you and I are spirits living in bodies, so we are receiving input from the spiritual world. That person's belief system can overtake your atmosphere. We're talking about how does spirits influence our thinking. You can be caught up in an aura of assumptions and self-deceptions that make it to us so that truth appears to be false. That's what it does. If you're going along, living your life, and somehow there's a spiritual influence where, okay, there's some kind of self-deception emanating from a spiritual group, and the spiritual side of us picks it up, you can get caught up into a space where things that are false appear to us to have this sort of glow around them. That's got to be true. That's got to be true. And that glow is just sponsored by this aura. Because if that wasn't there, the implication is we'd be able to see, that the truth is actually what's true. So somehow we can be, and isn't that a fascinating effect that it's not that it gets you to think particularly what they want, it's that truth appears to be false. And by the flip side, I would assume what's false then appears to be true. It also stirs, now look at how this aura is like almost exhibiting living characteristics. It is the projection of a person's mind, whether it means that's a particular spirit exerting this intentional influence on us, or whether it's just the nature of an aura like this interacting with our mind software. I don't exactly know, but look what it does. It also stirs up all kinds of supportive ideas so that it convinces the person to accept falsity as true, and even more intensely, evil as good. Have you ever come across a person, and I actually want to also introduce a side track to that. Have you ever come across yourself in a period previously in your life when you were completely convinced of something false? I'm thinking right now of people who you see them in documentaries, like they were born into some kind of cult system, and they for a long time believed it, but then once they got old enough to start to question things, had this major break with it, and now they can see why they believed it, but they are shocked at just how sucked into something they were. Is that because the mind can get so enveloped by this sphere of ideas that actually, sure, there's a physical component where you're learning things from people around you and you're reading text or something like that, but there's also a spiritual component that is reinforcing and making it so that even within your own mind, there's not the climate for the truth to actually get through? Or is there somebody else you just can't seem to get through to, even if you introduce what you feel like are rational, logical arguments and show them why the particular mode they're in is perhaps causing harm to themselves or others, but yet they seem impervious to those arguments? Could it be that the human nature is like this because of the nature of this auratic influence? Is that how you'd say that? This fact made it clear to me how easily we can become entrenched in falsity and evil. So hey, even if you were entrenched one thing in falsity, but another in evil, because you got these, I was going to say, don't be too hard on yourself. This is the nature of being human. We can get sucked into ideas that take us over, and we're vulnerable to that. To being a human mind, human spirit, we're naturally vulnerable to that. Interesting, sucked into evil. And we're going to talk in a minute about how demons specifically are linked to the craving for evil. But let's just keep reading this sentence, because, come on, sentences are meant to be read all at once. We have become entrenched in falsity and evil unless we believe the truth that comes from the Lord. So there's the antidote. It's not that we're just walking along, constantly helpless to whatever aura comes by next. How are we ever going to, not be under the influence of some kind of falsity spirit cloud unless we believe the truth that comes from the Lord? And this was for Swedenborg how he was able to take all the trips that he took and survive what he survived. That he was going all over, reporting going all over heaven and hell. And he would sometimes get asked, I think by people, like, isn't it dangerous? Like, you go and see all these evil spirits and you talk to them, you talk to the people in hell, you listen to their arguments and what they're trying to convince you of, you're going all over. And to him, what kept him safe enough that he was sort of had a press pass into the afterlife, that he was able to go into these spiritual war zones and come out with a clear picture of how the whole thing worked, was because he had, and he wasn't just born with this, he had to go through this intense process of regeneration and shunning his own evils, but he ended up having a really strong framework of divine truth. So he believed what he felt like was the Lord was saying through revelation, through, in his case, the Bible, about the nature of ethics and morality and what you should and shouldn't do and what is and isn't true. And because of that, he was able to, when these auras of influence came in, observe their effect on him and say, isn't that interesting? But ultimately not pull them in and not believe them. And isn't that what we're trying to do? Isn't that what we're trying to get to? I don't think you could ever promise a tonic that would say you're never going to have a negative critical thought come into your head, or you're never going to have some fear keep repeating itself about the future even when you know that thing isn't going to happen, or you're never going to have some kind of cloud of material concerns overwhelm you, or you're never going to have unwanted diatribes against things in your mind. That stuff is very hard to shut off. But what we can get, and what I sometimes am able to get, is that when it comes in, we're not attached to it. That we say, well, I know that this is not me. And I know that this is not the way I want to gather my information about life, is through these sort of random inflowing, like you just sort of switched on your mind to some little stream of talk radio and it's trying to tell you something about life. Aren't we trying to get to, much like the meditation technique I've mentioned before, when it's like, oh, there's a thought, it's moving by, and instead of like, oh, give me that, whatever you say, we're critical about it. We think, is this really something? And it passes through. That's where we're trying to get. That's what, to me, this believe the truth that comes from the Lord. Don't pick up your beliefs about life in the moment. Have a structure for what is good and true, that you're constantly open to changing and honing and all that stuff. But it's something that isn't like fluctuating like crazy, like a stock market or something. It's something that is relatively solid. So when these pitches come in at you, you can say, well, instead of reacting right now and getting all concerned and rolling into a ball or acting out or lashing out or something, I'm going to take a breath and just put this up against my framework and really weigh it and turn it over. Often the negative stuff won't be able to stand up to that kind of scrutiny, because it's really dependent on you not really examining how irrational it is or how destructive it is. It's just like, go with it. But if you have this truth that comes from the Lord, and everybody has their own connection to what they feel like is really higher truth, that's what is the aura antidote. So let's get now to continuing towards our aura war, which is going to come up right here. So you may want to look away. Such auras are denser or thinner depending on the nature of the falsities. And in the spiritual world, this stuff is perceptible. Like it's really like a cloud, and the worst falsities are like the darkest clouds we see here, warning us of a storm. These auras are completely out of harmony. Okay, can we please talk about something positive? Here we go. These auras are completely out of harmony with the auras of spirits who subscribe to the truth. So not only is believing the truth positive for how it affects our own mind, we create then our own aura that positively affects other people spiritually. If the two kinds of aura come near each other, war breaks out. So this would be not necessarily like, let's all get our swords and fight with each other. This is more like, imagine two elements. I don't know which elements, but there's some elements that magnesium and water or something like that. No, I don't. If you're a chemist, don't comment. Where when they hit each other, there's this huge reaction. Like the two things cannot be in the same space, this is what it is. Because if we're saying that an aura of falsity is a tangible spiritual object, and then an aura of truth and goodness is a tangible spiritual object, these two are the opposite. This is all about, the one at the top is all about malice and hurting and smallness and fear and us against everybody, and this is all about mutual love and interdependence and truth and uplifting and freedom. These two can't share space, and so they react to each other. If the atmosphere of falsity is permitted to win, the good spirits come into times of trial and anguish. So you can have a really rough period for spirits when an aura of falsity takes over. Do we go through this in our own life as well? Have you ever had a period of life where it seems like your mind is kind of collapsing in on you? Could this be another way that spirits are influencing our thinking? Certainly seems to be the implication based on this and a lot of what Swedenborg is talking about. Let's get into some specific auras of falsity that Swedenborg saw influencing people. I also perceived an atmosphere of disbelief. Okay, so we got an aura of disbelief in which people accept nothing that is said and scarcely even what is in plain sight. This is an aura of denial. That's not true. Interesting. And I perceive the atmosphere of those who believe nothing but what they can grasp with their senses. And I wonder if this is Swedenborg often coming up against people who were saying all of this stuff you're talking about, spirits and angels and all that. I've got my microscope, I've got my telescope. I don't see that. There's no way there's anything beyond what is immediately sensorially apparent. And he's saying, hey, man, you need to have a little bit more of an open mind, and perhaps this aura is shutting that mind. In addition, I saw someone, now we're getting into some weird spirit correspondency stuff. I saw someone dressed in dark clothing sitting near a mill, apparently milling flour. That is weird, and I guess even weirder in 21st century because we don't really mill, but maybe that's more common. Maybe that's like somebody, what do we do now? Microwaving food. At his side appeared a little mirror. Later I saw certain products of his disordered imagination, which were surprisingly wispy. So we go from representative objects, like the mill and the mirror must mean something about his internal condition, but then this disordered imagination, that's thoughts becoming visible, that in the spiritual world, much like these auras, you can have your ideas projected outside. And somehow this guy's are wispy. I wondered who he was, but he came to me and said that he was the person sitting by the mill. So this is the wispy person and the mill person are one and the same. And that he had possessed the idea that absolutely everything was simply a hallucination and nothing was real, which is why he ended up in this position. So some kind of existential nihilism, or I guess you could just call that nihilism. This person got into a place where not just we need to break out of the illusion of greed and materialism, or even that is the physical world more of a projection, but just there's nothing. Nothing is real. And somehow this represented why a mill, why milling flour? He doesn't explain it here, but it's fascinating to think that somehow that mindset creates those conditions around this person. Much experience has taught me to recognize, and here we really get into the influence of spirits and demons. It's what we all came here to see. So how do they influence? And is this an important thing to Swedenborg, this influence? Is it a tertiary thing to life? Is it central to life? Much experience has taught me to recognize, and to recognize as clearly as I recognize anything. This became as self-evident to Swedenborg as the fact that we live and walk around and breathe and that the sun is bright and shiny. That spirits who are caught up in falsity influence our thinking and thoroughly convince us that falsity is true. Why is there so much rampant untruth in the world? Also, why do things like, if you're talking about God and talking about life after death, we'll just put that, all, spiritual kind of stuff, why is this all, like, we come here to have this discussion, and is it true, is it not? Sometimes it really feels true, other times it doesn't. Why does that stuff seem so foreign? If it actually is accurate, why aren't we more connected to that? Is that there is this sort of spiritual cloud around everything right now that kind of makes that it's not as self-evident as it should be? Is this what blocks us off from that? But even take spiritually kind of stuff out of it, the fact that we should be loving to each other, the fact that other people are just as much people as we are, that stuff is often seems like it's up for debate. Why would that be? Could it be that there's a global kind of, we're all being influenced by falsity in one way or another? Is it easy for false ideas to take hold because of that? But look at the next thing, and sort of the negative, that's the spirit component. What's the demon component? We cannot see it any other way, and this results from their aura. So this aura gets in, convinces us. At times we may be under the sway of auras like this. And you can check your own thinking. Does it seem like, something that was clear to me is now not clear to me? Are there distinct weather pattern shifts in the mind? And now we get into demons. Demons, too, who are immersed in evil, influence our will in this way and cause evil to seem utterly good. And that, to me, is even more potent and fascinating. Because why are so many people, and why do we at times want to justify stuff that's just not okay? Why do we come up with these reasons that, okay, I'm sure I'm doing this thing that harms a ton of people, but I like it? Or why are there all these conquering empires that, it's all right for me to plunder and stuff because I have some... Why doesn't evil seem evil? Why do we have to go out and campaign to say, don't hurt each other, be good to each other? Is it because of this influence that the demons cause evil to seem utterly good? And in your own mind, is it ever like, why do I have a tendency toward this thing that I don't want to have a tendency toward, but I just like, it's just fun to criticize people or whatever it is? The demonic aura, the will side, is to cause evil to seem utterly good. The good news to me, I don't know about you, is that it can be a source of despair to me if it seems like, evil actually is good, or good doesn't have the things I want to be true about life don't seem true. The love is not as self-evident, and then from that, my own life is no good, and maybe I don't deserve protection and healing and all these kinds of things. To me, it's good news to think, okay, this is, even though it's creepy, the idea that there's a spiritual world and there's demons and spirits, but really, along the same lines as there's germs and there are phone scams and there are things that get at us, to just think, okay, that's not what it seems like. The clouds are closing in and life seems really dark and negativity seems more powerful and all that. That's not the truth. It's just an aura. It's just a spiritual distortion on the way it is. And the actual truth is like the sun above clouds. But when it gets through, it was there all along, and that is real. To me, immensely comforting to be able to separate things out like that and sort them. And that's the potency of Swedenborg's insights. I've had 1,000 opportunities to perceive clearly the influence of each group, demons and spirits, to tell who it came from, how angels working for the Lord removed the effects, and many other details besides, which cannot well be listed individually. From this, I could see two things with such certainty that nothing has ever seemed more certain to me. One is where the falsity and evil in us come from. The other is the fact that false assumptions and the desire for evil give rise to these auras that stay with us after physical life is ended and that display themselves so openly. A crazy sounding idea, a very wild claim, but Swedenborg is saying this is your missing piece to the equation of why we all walk around with minds that often seem against us or against the human race, and why does humanity struggle with darkness so much and with delusion so much? It is because there are these auras that come in and try to affect us. And Swedenborg said, I'm gonna tell you all about it, even though nobody's gonna think I'm a good scientist anymore. Does it paint a picture that helps? And I think it does. To say where the falsity and evil in us come from, that it's not just we are evil, or it's not just falsity is true, it's that instead it is there's just this whole thing that is the source of falsity evil, that's hell, that we can eventually shed and push away and move up into the light permanently. and that it's not that it's true, it's just about us extricating ourselves from it, that's a big deal. That feels much more freeing to me, and that gives me a framework by which to push back on things that I would just have to accept as reflections of reality, but instead to say, are you a distortion of reality? Instead, to me, that rocks, and that's the news from heaven. Was it good news to you? Is there anything you can pick out of there? Let me know. Please leave a comment. How are you doing this week? Are these concepts doing you any good? Does this give you any leverage if you find out any techniques of how to push back on these negative auras? Let me know. How does that concept sit with you? Is it strange to think that we could have influence from the spiritual world when you sit down and look at the mind in totality? Does it seem like does it help us explain it? Much like the concept of dark matter and dark energy help explain the physical world because you need them to square how the bodies move in space and everything like that. Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe. It's been great having you, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with you again very soon on News from Heaven.